Hi students, it's Dr. Marks, and we're going to spend a few minutes talking about positive versus normative economic thought. Now, you're going to need to be able to distinguish between these two things, between economic thought that is positive, and we're going to explain what that means, versus thinking that is normative. You're going to have to apply these topics by identifying statements as either positive or normative. And you'll see these types of questions in both quizzes and tests. But I also want to motivate for you that both contribute to policy and decision making, that we don't make decisions purely on positive information or purely on normative information or thinking. Both come into the arena when we're trying to make decisions about policies. Let's start by talking about positive thought. When we think about positive thoughts or positive discussions or positive economic statements, these are based on data, economic theory, or economic models. So whatever I'm saying has lended itself from data that I've looked at, from applying an economic theory, or using an economic model. For example, supply and demand is an economic model. These types of statements, positive statements, can generally be confirmed using some kind of scientific approach. So it's just not willy-nilly. I can look at it and I can evaluate it in some way that we will probably all agree. But the key thing that will probably help you understand is that these don't reflect any opinions or value judgments. So a positive statement doesn't reflect anybody's opinion or values that they're imposing. So in this sense, positive statements are purely objective. So positive, objective, those go hand in hand. For example, what if I said in 2017 Longwood had its largest freshman class in the history of the university? Well, is this positive or not? Hopefully we all agree that I can confirm this with data, which means I can subject this statement to testing, and therefore it's not simply my opinion. There will be some generally accepted method of investigating the validity of this statement, right? I can get my colleagues together and we will all agree that this is either true or not true, and we will all agree on the approach to confirming whether or not it's true. We will all agree, hey, there's data, let's pull the data, and then we'll see if the data supports the statement. I might conclude, for example, if gasoline prices rise, then airline travel costs will increase. All right. Well, that is also a positive statement. Again, why? Why is this a positive statement? If gasoline prices rise, then airline travel costs will increase. Well, economic theory is the basis for this conclusion. As you're going to be learning in another few weeks, we can illustrate this with supply and demand. Again, supply and demand is one of the models we have in our toolkit in economics. So, if I can make a conclusion based on applying a generally accepted economic principle or by using a generally accepted economic model, then we have a statement that is positive. I can further conclude from this scenario that if airline prices rise, so we just said because gas prices were going up, consumers will purchase fewer airline tickets. Well, that is also a positive statement. Why is that a positive statement? That if airline prices rise, consumers will purchase fewer airline tickets? Because the law of demand tells me this. And that is a basic principle of economics that you're going to learn a lot about. So once again, this statement that we've just made, if airline prices rise because gas prices rise, consumers will purchase fewer airline tickets. This is a positive statement, a positive conclusion. Again, it doesn't reflect my opinion, it doesn't have a value judgment, and I'm using tools in the economist's toolkit to make these claims. So, What we've then stated is that positive logic includes things that can be confirmed with data or conclusions that are made from applying economic theory or our economic laws or principles, or conclusions generated from models. So positive logic comes from data, concluding things based on economic theory and laws, and applying our economic models. And in this sense, it's value-free, opinion-free. It doesn't represent my opinion. So that's important to understand about positive statements. They are not based on people's opinions. When economists evaluate policy, and economists are often called on to evaluate a policy or a potential policy, our foundations for our arguments need to be positive, right? When somebody hires an economist to do an evaluation, they're not looking for purely an opinion. They want the economist to apply the tools in the economist's toolkit. So we might be looking at what are the implications of this new policy according to theory and to models. So if we implement this new policy or regulation, what does theory tell us? We might be asked to think about who are the winners. There's policy usually creates some kind of winner, but unfortunately, who are the losers? Because policy creates losers as well. So there's a trade-off here. So what are those trade-offs involved? We have to recognize those trade-offs before we decide if we're going to implement a certain policy or regulation. We might ask, are costs going to increase or are costs going to decrease? And what future impacts might need to be thought about, right? Often the consequences of our decisions lie in the future. So what are we not thinking about now, but we need to be thinking about in 5 years, in 10 years? That's also relevant when we evaluate policy. So economists apply the tools in their toolkit to make conclusions that are positive. And all of these statements, what are the implications of models? Who are the winners? Who are the losers? Are there trade-offs? What's going to happen to costs? What about future impacts? What might they be? What do we need to think about? These are all positive statements because they come from data, principles, theory, models. Now, positive logic provides the information required to help economists decide if a policy or regulation is a good idea. So we have to start with our positive logic. But here's the thing. After that, there are going to be harder decisions and harder questions that are not positive. For example, I've already decided these are the things that are going to happen. Winners, losers, trade-offs, costs go up. But now I need to ask some really tough questions. Okay, if we implement this policy, is it fair? Is the trade-off justifiable? Is this worthwhile? Is this the way the world should work? Well, those questions don't involve data. They don't involve our models. They don't involve theory. And for that reason, these are what we would call normative. So these are normative questions. Is it fair? Is it justifiable? Is it worthwhile? Is it the way the world should work? So think about it, guys. If I got a group of economists together, we're probably going to agree on the positive questions. Who are the winners? Who are the losers? What happens to costs? What happens in the future? But after that, we might not agree on, is this fair? Is this a good idea? Can we justify higher costs? Is this a worthwhile regulation? Is this the way the world should work? We're not always going to agree because these are things that are normative. So normative statements are ones that involve a value judgment. Ones that involve a value judgment. So positive, remember, can be tested. It is not an opinion. But our normative discussions, well, those are ones that do involve our value judgments. It might incorporate the way we would like the world to work. Maybe we perceive that the world should be more equitable, more fair, resources and income should be more equally distributed. It might incorporate our perceptions of what is right and what is wrong. And do we all have the same perceptions of what is right and what is wrong? The answer is no, right? My perceptions might be different from yours. So, again, this ties into our opinions, our value. So the bottom line with things that are normative is they are not testable using some scientific method, right? Remember, positive statements are testable because they stem from data, models, economic theory. But normative statements are tied to our values and our opinions, and they are not testable. Let's say I have a statement, Longwood should require all students to take a Principles of Economic course. All right, well, what word jumps out at you there in that sentence? Hopefully the word should, right? Does everyone agree that this statement would be based on my own opinion, being an economist? So it's clearly a value judgment. And I can't test this, right? How would I go about testing? Longwood should require all students to take a Principles of Economic course. So we can conclude that this is clearly normative. Now, if I had said instead that the majority of four-year institutions require that students take a beginning economics course. Let's look at that again. The majority of four-year institutions require that students take a beginning economics course. Does everyone agree that would be positive? Why is this positive and not normative? Well, because data can be used to confirm, right? It is not just somebody's opinion. So the previous slide where it said all Longwood students should take an economics course, clearly that's normative. The word should is a highly normative word because it reflects what I think should happen, the way I think the world should look. But if I'm reporting data, the majority of four-year institutions require that students take a course. All right, that's positive because it's driven by data. Evaluating policy often requires both positive and normative thought. First, we have to start with the positive. So you estimate that a policy will increase costs to some people. So you're hired as an economist and they say, what's going to happen? And you're like, well, okay, one important outcome is that some people will see higher costs. That's clearly a positive statement. That comes from the tools in your economics toolkit. But then you're asked to determine if this trade-off is justifiable. We want to implement some policy, but we know some people's costs will go up. Is that fair? Is it justifiable? Is it worthwhile? Should we proceed? Well, now we're getting into the normative. Make sure you see the difference. You estimate a policy will increase costs to some, and you made that determination based on economic theory. But then you're asked to weigh in with your opinions. Do you think it's justifiable, fair, worthwhile? Should we proceed even though costs go up to some? Now you're being asked a question that is normative. So often we apply normative thinking, but after collecting the positive information, right? Economists weigh in often in the normative, but only after they've done the research to determine what positive information is relevant. We know that policies create both winners and losers. So again, if we're going to evaluate this fully, we need to use positive thought to evaluate costs and benefits and impacts and trade-offs, learn about redistribution of income and resources. And again, those things, costs, benefits, impacts, trade-offs, redistribution, that's guided by economic theory and models. So that's positive. But when deciding whether to implement a policy, well, based on this information, now we have to think about normative questions. For example, is it okay if some people lose? Again, is it fair? Is it justifiable? So understand that policy discussions require us to think about both. So when you're writing, you really need to understand the writing assignment that you're given, not just in my classes, but in any class. Your professor might be looking for a positive discussion. And if he's looking for a positive discussion, you might not want to start getting normative. And I sometimes start getting normative when I really need to stay positive. Maybe you're asked for a historical perspectives paper where you are collecting information on history. That would be positive. Or you're asked to put together an economic policy paper. That would also be positive. But maybe you're asked to write a position paper where really the professor wants to know your opinion. Maybe you're asked to write a paper on your feelings related to abortion rights, especially given that the Supreme Court is evaluating some of this. So maybe this is a relevant discussion for your class. Do you agree that that would be normative if you're asked your opinion? How do you feel about it? Where do you weigh in? Or maybe you're in a religion class and you're asked about your feelings about organized religion. That would also be, again, normative. Of course, papers might need to incorporate both. For example, could I use data to defend my position on abortion rights? Absolutely. So I collect data, that's positive, but I use it to defend my normative position. So the bottom line, gang, for our class, we're going to be using a positive approach, right? This is really not a class driven by anybody's opinion. We're going to be applying models and theory and principles of economics. Now, if I have an opinion to share with you, then obviously I will be speaking in the normative. But for this particular class, I don't think that will happen very often. And if it does, I'll be clear that I'm stating my own views. But as I said, generally what we're doing is relying on the tools of our economics toolkit, which means we're staying in the positive. So let me know if you have any questions at all. Thanks for listening, gang, and have a fantastic day.